In January of this year, average tariffs in the United States were 2.5%. So that means any good that came into the country, the typical one, you're just paying 2.5 cents for every dollar of imports. That's since jumped to 28%. That's a big change in the course of 3 months, and it's historically high. Tariffs haven't been that high since the early 1900s. You go way back in US history, tariffs had a very specific purpose, and that was to raise money for the federal government. It was hard to tax people's incomes because people lived on farms, they lived all over the place, and tax collectors would have had to get on horses and go to the four corners of the United States to pick up the cash folks would have owed the government. Tariffs were easy to collect because all you had to do was have presence at a port. Over time, we moved from taxing goods to fund the US government to taxing incomes, and that happened in the early 20th century. We then figured out that tariffs were a way of separating countries, keeping them apart, and lowering tariffs were a way of bringing countries back together. The big move to lower tariffs came after World War II. We just finished a major conflict that had brought us to the point of civilizational collapse. We realized that if we wanted to lower the risk of conflict in the future, we needed to find ways to trade with each other much more intensively. How do we do that? Lower our import tariffs on each other so that Europe could send us goods, we could send Europe goods. The US and Europe and Japan and Canada and Australia embarked on a project of lowering barriers to each other and expanding the global community of trading nations. That community expanded in a big way in the 1980s and 1990s as countries in the developing world decided they didn't want to have high tariff barriers with respect to the US and Europe and other countries. They wanted to participate in that global community of nations, and that led to a massive expansion in global trade.
We must strengthen the organization of our trade agencies to promote free trade and the increased flow of American goods.
The biggest country to join that community during that time period was China. When the US got big relative to the rest of the world, we were by far and away the largest economy, and so we were able to export the excess of what we produced to other countries, and we imported a bit in return. Over time, what then happened is that the rest of the world got big too, such that today we live in a world in which countries have widely varying patterns of comparative advantage in different stuff. Some countries are really good at producing shoes and t-shirts. Some countries are really good at producing avocados and mangoes. And some countries are good at producing IT-related services, software, cell phones. Now that we're in that world, it's really hard for the US to produce everything we'd like to consume. And so what international trade does is make it possible for us to enjoy the incredible variety of goods and services that the world now makes available. What Donald Trump has said about his trade policy is that his intent is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. If we were to raise tariffs high enough and keep them in place for long enough, we would do that. If the only way for Americans to get manufactured goods is for us to produce them at home, we can pull that off. It would take a while, and the adjustment would be extremely painful. Many parts of the United States lost substantial numbers of manufacturing jobs as a result of import competition. Much of that import competition came from China as its economy grew in the 1990s and 2000s. The pain those communities experienced was real, and the pain that workers in manufacturing in those communities experienced was real. If we want to help those workers, though, import tariffs are probably not the best approach. That's because the nature of manufacturing production has changed dramatically over the 25 years since those jobs were lost. It has become much more capital intensive, meaning for every dollar of output, you use fewer workers and more machines, and much more technology intensive. If we do bring manufacturing production back, what that's going to mean is more output in the US, but not a lot in the way of more jobs. We should be thinking about how we retrain workers to find jobs in new expanding industries that pay high wages. That includes healthcare, that includes IT, that includes commercial truck driving, includes part of manufacturing, but manufacturing would actually be a small part of that story. What's likely to happen this summer as those tariffs take effect is that we're going to be experiencing substantial economic pain. Financial markets might get a little freaked out because the U.S. economy is likely headed into a downturn. And there might be concern about the ability of the United States to attract the same amount of capital that it's attracted in the past. That could send the market for U.S. Treasury bills into a tizzy. And the combination of those factors might create really strong economic headwinds that could force Donald Trump to change his mind and lower those barriers.